Hello, my name's Judith Renton, and I have a little encouragement that I would really like to share with you. I remember years ago waking up one morning. I was at my nana's house in Leicester, and I thought, where am I? And then suddenly it dawned on me. I was there because it was Christmas. In fact, it was Christmas Day, and there was lots of fun going to come. I still remember that delicious feeling of waking up and realising where I was. But sometimes we have times when we wake up and actually we have a feeling of dread. We really don't want that day to start. We don't want to get up at all. Last year for me, there was some tough times at work, and I had mornings when I felt up and I just didn't want to have to do the things I had to do. The good news is we're not alone when we feel like that. Right now, days are full of worries about coronavirus, about how it might affect us and our families and friends, and even our country and the world. But people throughout the ages have felt those same worries and fears about what's going to happen. The Bible is full of people expressing these thoughts, everyone from kings to ordinary people. Even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane wondered about what was happening. The Old Testament Psalms are full of people expressing their feelings and doubts to God. They were poems set to music written by people over 2,500 years ago who felt those same feelings and then shouted at God because they felt like that. I'd like to read a little bit out from Psalm 88. Verses 13 to 15. This was written by one of a guild of worship leaders that was established by King David. And this is what it says. I'm standing my ground, God, shouting for help. At my prayers every morning, on my knees each daybreak. Why, God, do you turn a deaf ear? Why do you make yourself scarce? For as long as I remember, I've been hurting. I've taken the worst you can hand out, and I've had it. Now that was written by someone at the end of their tether, wondering why, after all their praying, God doesn't seem to have listened and doesn't seem to be with them. They're real questions that we feel as well, and sometimes few answers satisfy us in those times of pain. You know, when you do feel that way, it is okay to feel your questions don't have clear answers. It's okay to have doubts that God is actually going to sort things out. It's okay that you can't just push it away and then put on that happy smile. And it's okay to tell God, even shout at God about it. After all, shouting and moaning and doubting is there in the Bible. Just read the Psalms. And it doesn't mean that God is against you, or that he's made things go wrong for you to punish you or to test you. Stuff happens. If you would do feel like that, I would encourage you by saying you will not always feel this way. And it is okay to be honest about how you're feeling with God, whether that's doubt or anger or grief or loneliness. He has arms big enough to hold you and those strong feelings. A friend of mine told me a story a number of years ago now about when he was kneeling in a graveyard at the side of a grave of someone very dear to him. And in that same graveyard there were a couple of other gravestones to people from his family. He was feeling at rock bottom. He was telling God what he thought of him, shouting at God, questioning God, and he said at one time he even swore at God. Once he'd ranted on to God, he stood up and turned around, and there behind him was another gravestone that he'd not really noticed before, and carved into the sides of it were two arms that looked as if they were reaching out to give you a hug. And in the middle of the gravestone he noticed a name, and that name was David. Now his own name was David. And when he saw that, he felt an overwhelming feeling of God's presence with him. And he felt that he had a big hug from God at that time. That picture of God's arms enfolding you after such an explosion of feelings has really stuck with me for many years. Those arms have reminded me that God doesn't abandon us in times of doubt or in times of questioning. He doesn't go off us when we behave that way. He's always there, whether we feel happy, calm, cross or annoyed. He stands with us through the turmoil, through the doubts and fears, and he hugs us close whether we can feel it or not. At the beginning of Psalm 88, the writer actually says he reminds himself that God does care, even though he wasn't quite believing it at the time. But it is in these times when we're really honest to God that we can actually deeply meet with God and be transformed by that meeting. I'd like to finish with a short prayer. God of rescue and refuge, of shelter and strength, my still centre, my strong tower, when all is turning, may I turn to you. Amen.